Lord Jesus, on this Eastern even, we pause to remember the great price you paid, our justification. Give to us discipline to appreciate love and adore your Son, Jesus. We are now with Bishop Gilbert, Burnet, History of the Reformation in England, Volume 3.50. The Lord Herbert reckons among the chief causes of King's last rupture with Francis that he had not deserted the Bishop of Rome, consented to a reformation as he once promised. I saw when I passed through Zurich a volume of letters that passed between Bullinger and those English divines that has been so kindly entertained by him in that noble canton. And by the interposition of my learned, judicious, and pious friend, Mr. Turretin of Geneva, Mr. Otto, a worthy professor there, has taken such care that copies of them are procured for me, in which we may see the sense of those who revived our Reformation in Queen Elizabeth's time. Men who'd been abroad and had seen things about them in a true light, that saw in what the strength of popery lay, and what fortified or weakened the body of the Reformed, were liker to truer views than can be expected from retired and sullen men who've lived in a corner and have but a small horizon. It has been objected to me that I have said little of proceedings in convocation and of the struggle that the clergy made before they were brought to make the submission, which brought those bodies under restraints that seem now uneasy to the advocates of church power. I must confess I have been very defective here. I understood that the books of convocation were burnt. None of these great men under whose direction that work went on did anything of those discoveries that have been made of late. So no wonder if I passed over what was then so little known. Yet now I have examined all that I could find of those matters. I confess I am not inclined to expect much from those assemblies of clergymen. I've seen nothing in our church history to incline me to depart from Gregory Nazianzen's view of those assemblies. What has happened among ourselves of late has not made me of another mind, and I will not deny but that my copiousness of these matters is, in my opinion, one of the meanest parts of my work. The wisest and worthiest man in that convocation, Archbishop Warren, was the person that promoted the submission the most. It was no wonder if a corrupt clergy that made such ill use of their power had no mind to part with any branch of it. Yet since these things have been of late such a subject of debate among us, I have taken what pains I could to gather all that is left in those times in such copies, or rather abstracts, as have been of late found in private hands. Let me just check something here. Okay, we're on the right page here. I'm just trying. It's introduction at the top. This seems familiar. It's quite possible that I've read this before. Excuse me for the little break in time here. I apologize. Yeah.
Did you already finish?
No, I'm working. Here we are, page 51. I really apologize for this delay here. This is book 3, and he's talking about, there we go, about not being able to cover the convocations he'd like. Yet since these things have been of late such a subject of debate among us, I have taken what pains I could to gather all that is left of those times in such copies, or rather abstracts, as have been of late found in private hands. Only I will set down the opinion of Sir Thomas More, the best man of the popish side in that age of those meetings. This is from More's Apology, I guess, 1533. It is true, he says, the clergy's assembling at the convocation was called by the name of confederacies. But he adds, if they did assemble often, and there did such things for which such assemblies of clergymen in every province through all Christendom from the beginning were instituted and devised, much more good might have been grown thereof, than the long use can suffer us now perceive. But all my days, as far as I have heard, nor I suppose a good part of my fathers neither, they came never together to convocation, but at the request of the king. And at such their assemblies concerning spiritual things have very little done. Wherefore that they have been in that necessary part of their duty negligent, or that God suffer to grow to an unperceived cause of division and grudge against them. God, whom there's such negligence hath, I fear, sore offended. There's a footnote here, 1532. The affinity of the matter has led me to reflect on a great transaction with relation to the Church of France, which was carried on and finally settled in the very time that King Henry was breaking with the court of Rome. It was the concordat that Francis I made with Pope Leo X. The king and the Pope came to a bargain by which they divided the liberties of the Gallican Church between them, and indeed quite enslaved it. There are so many curious passages in the progress of that matter that I, hoping these will be very acceptable entertainment to the nation, and the rather because in it this nation will see what it is to deliver up the essential liberties of a free constitution to a court, and to entrust the integrity and firmness of courts of justice, when an assembly of the states is no more necessary to the raising of money and the support of the government. And will nothing written or language with relation to this matter, besides that account of I gave in my book concerning the regale, was taken from a very exact history of the transaction that was written by Mr. Pinson, printed anno 1666, and it seemed to some very proper judges to relate so much to our affairs as they thought it very probably disposed the nation more easily to throw off the papal authority. They saw what a filthy merchandise the court of Rome had made of the liberties of the neighboring church, taking care only to secure their own profits, delivering up the rest to the crown. The best writers of that church have on many occasions lamented the loss of their liberties by a detestable bargain, into which Francis's necessities, wrought on by the practices of the court of Rome, drew him. By this Church of France, being a queen, became, as Bishop Godot expresses it, a slave. And he adds, our fathers have grown and all that love the order of the house of God will still run, as long as elections continue to be put down, so that we must needs enter into the sanctuary by way of the court. In another place, these promotions have been always fatal to the church, and the bishops that the court have been made ordinarily the chief advancers of schisms and heresies, and the oppression of the church. And he concludes, one cannot read Nazianzen's verses of the prelates of his time without being struck with horror and forced to acknowledge that a secular temper is entirely contrary to the episcopal spirit. Of this, the Greek writer makes a severe remark in the history of Andronicus' reign, which may perhaps be just as aptly applied to other reigns, telling what sort of bishops were then made. Princes chose such men to that charge who may be their slaves, and in all things are obsequious to what they prescribe, and may lie at their feet and have not so much a thought contrary to their commands. This change in their constitution has put an end not only to national, but even to provincial synods in that kingdom. Some were indeed held upon the progress that Luther's doctrine was beginning to make in France, and others during the civil wars, in order to the getting of the Council of Trent, received in France. But now, in the space of 90 years last, there are no more brought together. The assemblies of the clergy need only to give subsidies and to present their grievances, but do not pretend to the authority of a regular synod. And though in the year 1682 they drew up some articles, that these had their authority only from the severity of the king's edict, till by a transaction with the court of Rome that was let for Rome. I have now gone over all matters that do properly fall within this introduction. It remains that I leave the sense of the subject of this, and in my 2 former volumes, upon the consciences of my readers. Can it be possible that any are so depraved as to wish we had no religion at all, or to be enemies of the Christian religion? Would these men reduce us to be a sort of Hottentots? And yet this must grow to be the effect of our being without all religion. Mankind is a creature by his make and frame disposed to religion. And if this is not managed by true principles, all of the jugglings of heathenism would again take possession of the world. If the principles of truth, justice, temperance, and of universal love do not govern them, they will soon grow curses and plagues of one another, and a crew of priests will grow up and will teach them to compound for all crimes and expiate the blackest practices by some rituals. Religion has so much to struggle with that if it is not believed to be revealed by God, it will not have strength enough to resist those ill inclinations, those appetites and passions that are apt to rise in our minds against its dictates. What there is in true and unsophisticated religion that can give color to prejudices against it, the whole complex of that rule of life which it prescribes is so plainly suited to our composition, both in our souls and our faculties, in our bodies, with relation to good health, industry, and long life, and to all the interests of human society, to the order and peace of the world, and to the truth and love that are the cements and securities of the body politic, that without any labored proof of its divine original, these are such characters that they may serve to prove it is set into the world as the lover of mankind. had the evidence that was given at its appearing in the world, that he who was the first author of it, and those whom he employed first to propagate it, did upon many occasions in full daylight, and in the sight of great multitudes, do things so far above the powers of nature, in such uncontested miracles, that by these it evidently appeared they were assisted by somewhat superior to nature. They could command it at pleasure. Here is the fullest ground of conviction possible. These things were written, published, and received in an age in which they were transacted. And those writings have been preserved with great care and are transmitted to us at the distance of about 16 ages, pure and uncorrupted. And these we have the fixed standard of our religion, and by them we can satisfy ourselves concerning all such practices. I wish those who take to themselves the name of freethinkers would consider well if they think it is possible to bring a nation to be without any religion at all, and what the consequences of that may prove, and then see if there's any religion so liable to be corrupted, and that tends so much to the good of mankind as the true Christian religion reformed among us. As for those that do truly believe this religion, and I have an ingenuous sense and taste of liberty, can they admit a comparison to be made between a religion restrained to a fixed standard, and to examine the sense as best they can? I mean, traditions which pretend they are infallible are expounders of it, and that the true standard is itself not to be exposed to common view. God is to be worshipped in a language not understood, instead of a competent provision to those who labor in this work. The head of them is to become a great prince, and may pretend to a power to dispose of kingdoms and states, to pardon sins, to redeem sinners out of the miseries of a future state, and that the character derived from him is so sacred that, in defiance to sense and reason, a priest by a few words can work a miracle, in comparison to which the greatest of miracles is nothing, and who by these means have possessed themselves of an immense wealth and vast authority. These are all things so strange a nature and so contrary to the genius and design of the Christian religion that it is not easy to imagine how they could ever gain credit and success in the world. But when men's eyes have been once opened, when they have shaken off the yoke and got out of the noose, when the simplicity of true religion has been seen into, and the sweets of liberty have been tasted, it looks like charm and witchcraft to see so many looking back so tamely on that servitude under which this nation groaned so heavily for so many ages. They may soon see and know what our happy condition is, and the freedom we enjoy from these impositions, and what their misery is that are condemned to them. It is not enough for such as understand this matter to be contented in their own thoughts with this, that they resolve not to turn papists themselves. They ought to awaken all about them, even the most ignorant and most stupid, to apprehend their danger and to exert themselves with their utmost industry to guard against it and to resist it. They ought to use all their efforts to prevent it, and earnestly to pray to God for his blessings upon them. If after all men's endeavors to prevent it, the corruption of the age, the art and power of our enemies, prove too hard for us, and not to them we must submit to the will of God, be silent, and prepare ourselves for all the extremities of suffering and misery. And if we fall under a persecution and cannot fly from it, we must resolve to glorify God by bearing our cross patiently. Illegal sufferings are no more to be borne than the violences of a robber. And if the law comes once to be in the hands of those wicked men who will not only revive the repealed laws against heretics, but if they can, carry their cruelty up to the height of an inquisition, then we must try by the faith and patience of the saints to go through fire and water, and in all things to be more than conquerors. I know some who are either apt to deceive themselves or hope to deceive others have in their mouths that popery is not what it was before the Reformation. Things are much mended, many abuses are detected, and things are not so gross as they were then. And they tell us that further corrections might be expected if we would enter into a treaty with them. In particular, they fancy they see the error of proceeding severely with heretics, so that there is no reason to apprehend the return of such cruelties as were practiced an age and a half ago. I answer to this and lay open the falsehood of it. We are to look back to the first beginning of Luther's breach. It was occasioned by the scandalous sale of pardons and indulgences, which all the writers of the popish side give up and acknowledge it was a great abuse. So in the countries where the Reformation got an entrance, or the neighborhood of them, this is no more heard of. It has been taken for granted that such an infamous traffic was now no more practiced. But of late, that we have had armies in Spain and Portugal, we are well assured that it's still carried on there in the most barefaced manner possible. It is true the proclaiming of a sale is forbidden by a bull, but there is a commissary in every place who manages the sale with the most infamous circumstances imaginable. In Spain, by an agreement with the Pope, the king has the profits of this bull, and it is no small branch of his revenue. In Portugal, the king and Pope go shares. Dr. Colbach has given a very peculiar account of the managing of the bull there. For as there is nothing so impudent that these men are ashamed to venture on, so they may safely do what they please, for the terror of the Inquisition is so severe a restraint that men dare not whisper anything against them. Notable instance of this has appeared lately when, in the year 1709, the privateers of Bristol took the galleon, in which they found 500 bales of these bulls, and 16 reams were in bale, so that they reckoned the whole to be 3,840,000. These bulls are imposed on the people and sold, the lowest at 3 rials, a little more than 20d, but to some at 50 pieces of 8, about 11 pounds of our money. This is to be valued according to the ability of the purchaser once in 2 years. All are obliged to buy them against Lent. Besides the account given of this in the cruising voyage, I have a particular attestation of it by Captain Dampier, and one of the bulls was brought me printed, so that it cannot be read. He was not concerned in casting up the number of them, but he says that there was such a vast quantity of them that they careened their ship with them. As for any changes that may be made in popery, it is certain infallibility is their basis, so nothing can be altered where a decision is once made. And as for the treatment of heretics, there's been such a scene of cruelty of late opened in France and continued there almost 30 years without intermission, that even in the kingdom where popery has affected to put the best face on things possible, we've seen a cruel course of severity beyond anything in history. I saw it in its first and sharpest fury and can never forget the impression that it made. The discovery lately made shows what the spirit of those at Rome who manage the concerns of that religion is even in a mild reign, such as old Chalsky's was, and we may suppose, well, because it was too mild, this was ordered to be laid before him to animate him with the spirit of persecution. When the Abbey of St. Gall was taken in the late war with Switzerland, the manuscript was found. The court of propaganda ordered their secretary to prepare for Innocent XI's own use, which after his death came into the hands of Cardinal Sfodrato, who was abbot of St. Gall. So at his death left this book there. It gives a particular account of all the missions they have in all parts of the world, rules and instructions, with which I hope those worthy persons in whose hands this valuable book is now fallen will quickly acquaint the world. The conclusion of it is an address to the Pope, in which they lay his duty before him, from two of the words in the New Testament directed to St. Peter. The first was, "Feed my sheep," which obliged him not only to feed the flock that was gathered at that time, but to prosecute the constant increase of it, bring those sheep into it that were not of the fold. But the other addressed to him, full of all sorts of beasts of which some were unclean. "Rise, Peter, kill and eat, and let all see that it is the duty of the great pontiff to rise up with apostolical vigilance, to kill and extinguish in the infidels their present life, and then to eat them, to consubstantiate their false and brutal doctrine into the verity of our faith." This is an affectation in these last words suitable to the genius of the Italians. The application of these two passages as containing the duties of a pope was formerly made by Baronius in a flattering speech to encourage Pope Paul V in war, which he was designing against the Venetians. But this we see, that how much soever we may let the fears of popery wear out our thoughts, they are never asleep, but go on steadily prosecuting their designs against us. Popery is popery still, acted by a cruel and persecuting spirit, and with what caution soever they may hide or disown some scandalous practices, here heretics dare look into their proceedings and lay them open. Yet even these are still practiced by them when they know that they may safely do it, and where none dare open their mouth against it. Therefore we see what reason we have to be ever watching and on our guard against them. This is the duty of every single Christian among us, but certainly those peers and commoners whom our Constitution has made the trustees and depositories of our laws and liberties and of the legal security of our religion, under a more particular obligation of watching carefully over this sacred trust, for which they must give a severe account in the last day, if they do not guard it against all danger, at what distance soever it may appear. If they are either absent or remiss on critical occasions, and if any views of advantage to themselves prevail on them, to give up or abandon the establishment. And here we will call it to a close. Glory be to the Father, Son, Holy Ghost. Amen.